Hey guys, we're going to talk about chronic mental illness and employment now. The handout is up on the online classroom page. Feel free to follow along. I want to start by detailing the demographic, and this demographic in particular of chronic mental health is broken down into three subgroups. The first being young adults who are experiencing their first psychotic episode but who are likely to be diagnosed with a chronic mental health problem. There are those who are currently employed but are at risk of losing their employment due to mental illness. And then there are those who are long-term mental health service recipients who are likely to, at some point in time, be either unemployed or underemployed. Now we're going to go on to the major problems, and there's one particular problem that seems to be the theme for this population within employment problems, and that is finding meaningful and challenging work within their field of interest. And most of those who do have a chronic mental illness have a desire to work but have a hard time finding that employment that matches their interests and skills. A lot of those suffering from chronic mental health problems adopt false beliefs regarding themselves, and one self-depreciating value that they all seem to adopt is that their diagnosis with a mental illness, along with the unavailability of vocational rehabilitation services, puts them at limited employment potential. There's large rates of unemployment and underemployment within this demographic of chronically mentally ill. And a huge concern is preventing job loss with those who have a mental illness. There are two particular interventions suggested for dealing with this problem. The first being at an individual level, which includes providing support for that particular worker and oftentimes includes coping strategies, relaxation techniques, and cognitive behavioral therapy to adjust for false beliefs. And there's also an intervention at the employment agency level. So this includes everything from having flexible hours to allowing for modifying job tasks to trying to create a more stress-free work environment. Employment has been shown to aid in the recovery of those who are facing a chronic mental illness. It provides a distraction from their diagnosis and the symptoms, as well as providing meaning for that individual. The best approach to dealing with employment concerns for this demographic is through full integration of services, which means that both employment specialists and mental health services are available through the same agency. Right now, there's a lack of integration of mental health services and employment and vocational support because there's not a lot of funding. So the agencies that deal with mental health don't have the funding left over to contribute towards helping improve employment support for this group. And some agencies don't see employment as part of the core problem for those who have chronic mental health problems, and therefore they don't have an emphasis or support in place for that employment side. Employment agencies find it awkward to bring in mental health services, so they don't go to mental health and mental health doesn't come to employment. So therefore we're creating this gap that these chronically mentally ill are just left to wander in the void. So establishing collaboration between agencies is vital. One suggestion has been to create vocational rehabilitation liaisons who work with both agencies to provide a holistic, fully integrated approach for individuals with chronic mental illness. Some barriers, particularly for the chronically mentally ill, are their symptoms and just the unpredictability of their illness, that there's still employer discrimination and a huge culture of stigma, stereotypes, myths in the work environment, and there's a lack of access to vocational rehabilitation and employment services. As well, people who are chronically mentally ill are likely to face a financial crisis at some point over the course of their illness. And so some of those specific needs include having some financial support or resource available to them through grants or some sort of reimbursement. There's also a particular need to address transportation concerns and childcare. as well as affordable pharmacological and psychiatric services and affordable and accessible healthcare, including substance abuse support. So, really, a holistic approach is necessary to providing them with the foundation they need to succeed in a work environment. Some of the suggested programs that have been found efficacious are support employment, which is essentially client centered. It's an evidence based principle that integrates both mental health support and employment services. It's time unlimited, so the individual is offered support even after a job placement is found. And it includes a rapid job search process. So they're really focused on getting an individual into some sort of work setting. There's also the IPS model, which is individual placement and support. This is a model of support that has a zero exclusion, and the client only needs to have a desire to work or a desire to attend school, and those resources are provided to them. It's also a rapid job search or education search, and it provides follow-along support, so throughout the program of school or finding employment and then continuing on in their employment or school program. It also bundles mental health support and counseling available on an individual basis. So, really works on getting in the gap and trying to provide both mental health support and employment or education support. Another one that I'd like to point out is assertive community treatment. This one I haven't found as widely accepted, especially in the Portland and Oregon area. But one program that is working pretty well, it seems like, is in Minnesota. And they are essentially a crisis support, and they've incorporated employment support into their umbrella and their scope. So I suggest that you check out Mental Health Resources Inc. That reference is on the references page of the handout, and you can check out how they've incorporated employment services and support into a crisis and community treatment approach. So, some treatment and program implications and strategies that counselors should implement are to know that the management of symptoms and the mental illness is a priority. So you can't just address the employment concerns, those mental health concerns also need to be addressed. Functional skills training is a huge part of supporting this demographic in an employment setting. Social functioning, social awareness training can be very helpful. Self-image and managing their perception of themselves is huge, and a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy can be supportive for that. Empowering the client is shown to provide some positive outcomes. That includes giving them the freedom of choice in services that they are receiving, having a significant role for them in the decision-making process, participation in planning, evaluation, and decision-making of the program, and providing that peer support and mentorship as well. Some of the effective long-term strategies are to allow for feedback from the client and to support education access as well as employment access. Opportunities to gain info and try a variety of jobs, whether that's through internships, volunteering, job shadowing, really any experience that's going to get them more realistically involved in what they're interested in. And obviously, we need to educate the public to reduce the myths, stereotypes, and misconceptions that are associated with chronic mental illness, especially in a work setting. So some of the current resources and organizations out there that are really helpful, there's NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness, and they have a couple pages that are dedicated towards work concerns. So there's the page Succeeding at Work, which provides information on requesting leave of absence and protection of rights. And there's also that when to tell page on NAMI, which includes how to go about telling your employer that you have a mental illness, and it talks about disclosing to everybody from friends to family, so that can be really helpful as well. One that I particularly want to highlight is the Multnomah County resource that's on the bottom of your resources tab there. They have a great brochure on that website that lays out what employment services are, what vocational rehabilitation looks like, and eligibility requirements and contacts for people who are chronically mentally ill but are looking for that support. So, where do we go from here? There's a lot of policy reform that's needed. There needs to be an increase in funding for Medicare and the Affordable Care Act to encompass employment support and lessen the frequency of disbursement of disability benefits. So, by spending that money proactively, we can limit the disbursement of disability benefits. The Affordable Care Act needs to work on expanding payment options for support employment and other supports. So maybe expanding reimbursements or coverage of those supports in addition to mental health problems and interventions. And getting creative on bundling funding is great. There's been suggestions to combine grants for the mental health population, like the Community Mental Health Services Block Grant with programs like Medicaid. And we need to prioritize the employment potential of those who have a mental illness. Like I said, they tend to limit themselves based on their diagnosis, and often the lack of access to employment support makes them feel like they're just not going to achieve that employment anyways. So that leads to a chronic self-fulfilling prophecy. There needs to be more support, and especially through the research. The research is there, but it's not as, the sample sizes aren't as large, so it's harder to generalize to the population of all those who are chronically mentally ill. So overall, I really support you guys in trying to work on addressing those mental health concerns, but also acknowledging that when a client is coming to your office with mental health problems, the likelihood that they are either unemployed, underemployed, or at risk of losing their job is significantly high. So really providing support for employment and successful employment is going to be vital to implementing treatments for mental illness in general. So this population is very unique and has very distinct needs that, if as long as we're aware, we're able to provide a filler for that gap of those who are wanting to be successful at work and also wanting to manage and successfully navigate their chronic mental illness. Thanks.